While they've always been formidable villains, the Balrogs of Morgoth were changed drastically from the time Tolkien first conceived them to his days after publishing The Lord of the Rings. These demons of shadow and flame would, in some versions, seem a massive brute force that could only be defeated by the greatest heroes of their time. In others, they were like an unrelenting swarm of hundreds. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the evolution of Tolkien's Balrogs. The Balrogs can be found among the very earliest of Tolkien's legendarium writings. In the Book of Lost Tales Volume 2, we see Balrogs most prominently in the fall of Gondolin. Even before the battle, we find Morgoth, here called Melko, threaten the elf Maeglin with these dreadful creatures. Yet as meed of treachery did Melko threaten Maeglin with the torment of the Balrogs. Now these were demons with whips of flame and claws of steel, by whom he tormented those of the Noldoli, who durst withstand him in anything, and the Eldar have called them Malkarauki. Here we see Balrogs used as torturers, and notably they have claws of steel, something we don't find in later versions. They still bear their iconic whips of flame, but another unique feature is that these early Balrogs wore armor made of iron. But it was not merely their accessories that stand out in these early drafts. Indeed, their very nature and origin was entirely different. Unlike the later tales, these early Balrogs were not originally Maiar. As Tolkien was working on his mythology around 1937, he indicates that they were not merely corrupted by Morgoth, they were made by him. And in the north, Morgoth built his strength and gathered his demons about him. These were the first made of his creatures. Their hearts were of fire and they had whips of flame. The gnomes in later days named them Balrogs. But in that time, Morgoth made many monsters of diverse kinds and shapes that long troubled the world. While some may assume this could mean that this was simply when the Balrogs were corrupted into their demonic form, there is more evidence to make it clear this was not the case. For it is also said that after Morgoth steals the Silmarils and returns to his fortress of Angband, is when he first devises the Balrogs and the orcs. So in these early versions of his tale, Tolkien shows us demons of shadow and flame, wearing armor of iron and claws of steel, created by Morgoth. Another massive difference to his later writings is that these creatures were at least 1,000 in number. In one of his earlier versions of the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, Tolkien says, "But Morgoth now sent forth all the folk of Angband, and hell was emptied. There came afresh 100,000 orcs and 1,000 Balrogs, and in the forefront came Glomund the dragon, and elves and men withered before him." Likewise, we see in the Fall of Gondolin that many more Balrogs are killed in the early version than in the later. Here we find Tuor kills 5 Balrogs with his great axe, Dramborleg. Ecthelion, Lord of the Fountains, kills 3, including Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs. And even beyond that, we are told that another 40 are killed by warriors of King Turgon's house. While their ability to overwhelm and destroy Gondolin and win victory in the Nirnaeth Arnoediad are formidable, they are clearly far different in this version of the tale. And indeed, Christopher Tolkien points this out, saying the early conception of Balrogs makes them less terrible and certainly more destructible. While they may have been less terrible in this iteration, we know they were still quite fearsome and of great stature. For in the early Fall of Gondolin, we see Glorfindel's duel with a Balrog, where it is said the demon was double the elf's stature. likely giving us thousands of these creatures somewhere between 12 to 14 feet tall. As we know, 1937 would see the publication of The Hobbit, and Tolkien would begin writing the sequel late that same year. And in the first volume of the sequel, we see Gandalf's famous confrontation with one of the dreaded Balrogs. And initially, Tolkien wrote a very different reaction from Celeborn and Galadriel to this news. "A Balrog," said Celeborn. "Not since the elder days have I heard that a Balrog was loose upon the world. Some we have thought are perhaps hidden in Mordor, near the Mountain of Fire, but naught has been seen of them since the great battle and the fall of Thangorodrim. I doubt much if this Balrog has lain hid in the Misty Mountains, and I fear rather that he was sent by Sauron from Orodruin, the Mountain of Fire." Not only does this initial version indicate the elves thought multiple Balrogs could have been hidden in Mordor, but Celeborn also indicates that Durin's Bane was taking orders from Sauron and was sent by him. However, Tolkien would drop most of this dialogue, instead landing on the elves knowing something dwelt in Moria, but not knowing what until the Fellowship told them. Likewise, Tolkien would drop the idea that the Balrog was taking orders from Sauron. Instead, he had fled the destruction of the First Age and had hidden himself in the depths of the mountains. As we see the Balrogs change during the development of The Lord of the Rings, like the lack of armor and steel claws, the things that remain may be surprising. For as of The Lord of the Rings publication, Tolkien still envisioned there having been large numbers of Balrogs, and at this time, they were still created by Morgoth. Christopher Tolkien points this out in his History of Middle-earth series, pointing to the fact that in his writings in the 1950s, his father still referred to things like Melkor sending forth a host of Balrogs. Hardly how you would describe just a handful of these creatures. However, soon after the publication of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien would introduce the idea that Morgoth, and any Vala for that matter, was incapable of creating life. This is how orcs come to be twisted elves, and his newly formed idea that the Balrogs were instead corrupted Maiar, finally giving us the subtext of the Balrog, Sauron, and Gandalf being the same level of being. So great was the power of Morgoth's uprising that in ages forgotten he contended with Manwë and all the Valar, and through long years in Arda held dominion over most of the lands of the earth. But he was not alone. For of the Maiar many were drawn to his splendor in the days of his greatness, and remained in that allegiance down into his darkness. And others he corrupted afterwards to his service with lies and treacherous gifts. Dreadful among these spirits were the Valaraukar, the scourges of fire that in Middle-earth were called the Balrogs, demons of terror. With this new origin for the Balrogs, Tolkien would revisit the idea of their quantity. It seems that their power level has increased quite notably, so the idea of hundreds or even thousands of these beings waging war and dozens falling in battle is pretty far-fetched. Plus, we never get the impression that there are thousands of Maiar. They seem far more limited in number in Tolkien's designs. Thus, Tolkien makes a note within the margins of his writings that Christopher conveys. There should not be supposed more than, say, 3 or at most 7 ever existed. And as we see in Tolkien's later version of The Fall of Gondolin, 3 is indeed the bare minimum number of Balrogs we can have. 1 is killed by Ecthelion, 1 is killed by Glorfindel, and that leaves 1 remaining to flee Moria and become Durin's Bane. Admittedly, 3 does seem a bit on the lackluster side. For instance, we know Gothmog is touted as the Lord of Balrogs. Does that title carry much weight if he was only Lord over 2 others? 7 would certainly be a bit more impressive and worthy of such a title. and seeing 7 in the Battle of Unnumbered Tears or taking on Ungoliant makes those deeds seem more plausible. In a way, seeing such a number of servants, trusted by Morgoth to fight his greatest battles and use as torment against his enemies, reminds us of Sauron and his ringwraiths, though in this case both master and servants here are far more mighty. As ever, we are left to wonder what Tolkien's Balrogs would have looked like in a final version of the Silmarillion. While Gothmog would always be the chief of the Balrogs, at one point Tolkien gave us a second named Balrog, Lungorthin, described as a Balrog lord and a thane of Morgoth. This foe would strike Hurin on the mouth during his capture. Could Tolkien have gone on to flesh out more Balrogs in rewriting and expanding the narrative of the Silmarillion? We can only guess. But regardless, it's fascinating to see the transformation of Balrogs from a swarm of fiery creatures made by Morgoth to the towering demons of Shadow and Flame whose small numbers contained great power and magic. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. CCDC Red Team, Evil Chameleon, Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Freya Firestar, Chris and Meg Q, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Kiara Berlin, Z and N, Evely, Kia, Landry Quinn Walker, Ice Glazer, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.